Hello students. We have completed first unit Kuntak and Natya Shastra, and now we are moving on to second unit in our syllabus, Poetics by Aristotle. Let's have a quick look at Aristotle's life and biography today, and later on we'll take up the salient feature of poetics and individual chapters one by one. Aristotle was born in Stagria on the border of Macedonia. His mother, Phaestes, she was from a family of doctors, and his father, Nicomachus, was a court physician, a popular mathematician to the king of Macedonia, and he had a long association with the Macedonia court, which had greatly influenced Aristotle. But Aristotle's father died when he was still a boy, and at the age of 17, he was sent to Athens, which was considered or which was the intellectual center of the world, to complete his education. Before we move on to Aristotle, we know that these two names, Plato and Aristotle, they carry a long history because he was Plato's disciple, and when he joined the academy, he studied under Plato and almost for 20 years. And later on, he began to deliver lecture on his own, especially on the subject of rhetoric. And it is said about him that he loved the truth more than he loved Plato. And so he had no mind to remain a mere disciple. That means he had his own wit and intellect, which made him move beyond what Plato taught him. After Plato's death, Aristotle was obviously his rightful successor, but because he diverted in his thoughts from Plato, and his divergence made it impossible to be his successor, and next 4 years after Plato's death, he spent conducting certain zoological investigations on the islands of Assos and Lesbos. Later on, he was called to Macedonia by King Philip because he wanted his son to be tutored by Aristotle. And this is how we have an association with Alexander the Great and Aristotle. 7 years later, when Aristotle returns to Athens and founded the school Lyceum, it's a very popular monument or structure, historical place. Aristotle, when he was connected to Alexander, it started converting into a liability because the Athenians, after Alexander's death, they went on to rampage against all such people who have associated with Alexander. So the pre-Macedonian government, it was overthrown, and Aristotle was charged with impiety, and he fled to Athens. Then he fled to Chalcis, and where he said that Athenians, this is a quote by Aristotle himself, he said, Athenians have sinned twice against philosophy, referring of course to the unjust trial and death of Socrates. We also know that how Socrates died and the kind of trial and tribulations that Socrates had to face because of his ideologies and thoughts. Among the primary works of Aristotle, we are not taking up his works in detail, but we are only focusing on the discipline and the subjects on which he wrote. His main works are on prior analytics, which are actually the rules of logics. Other than that, although his study and writings range from a wide disciplines, logic, metaphysics, philosophy of mind, ethics, political theory, aesthetics, rhetorics, and non-philosophical fields also. Say, for example, empirical biology, where he actually excelled at detailed plant and animal observations and descriptions. So, physics, animal history, rhetorics, poetics, metaphysics, Necomanian, mathematics, ethics, and politics, these were his favorite subjects. Unfortunately, most of the writings by Aristotle are lost, and whatever remains with us is in the form of his lecture notes, which were also rediscovered very late in the first century when the students were re-examining the fragments of his lost works. Talking about poetics, because this is a text which has been prescribed in our syllabus, we just take up a few features. This is one of its text which is considered to be the first systematic critical theory in the world. That means this is the first text which gave us a systematic critical theory. And it is inspiring today also, but it has long inspired the thoughts of many writers, philosophers, and critics. It is also called and termed as the earliest surviving work of dramatic theory and the first extant philosophical treatise to focus on literary theory. Because in this text, Aristotle offers us an account of the poetic art, deriving from the poet, the author, the maker, the poetic art. That is how it becomes poetics. And he divides the art of poetry into verse drama. Now, according to Aristotle, verse drama includes comedy, tragedy, satire plays, etc. And poetry is lyric, poetry, and epic. All such genres, says that share the function of mimesis, that is imitation, but differs also in certain ways. Now, we'll take up this in detail when we take up the text, but just a quick glance. The three ways by which Aristotle says it differs is that they differ in music, rhythm, harmony, meter, and melody. Then there are differences of goodness in characters. Some characters are good and some are bad. And the third is there is a difference in how the narrative is presented, how a story is being told, and how it is being acted out. One more feature we quickly take up from poetics is Aristotle calls drama as action. According to him, he says all actors in a drama, they aim to mimic actions. They don't perform real actions. They just mimic actions which have already been performed. Now, this concept of imitation is very crucial in the understanding of dramatic activity because dramatic acting, it involves more than just imitation. For example, if someone is performing a murder in the drama and he will never be able to produce the exact replica of the murder because he cannot die. So that has really occurred, the murder which has already happened. He cannot perform the replica. Now, these acting dramas, they probably wish to avoid causing certain trauma to others or dragged off to, say, prison, etc. And actors, they may still choose to perform actions or on the stage which are copies of real or imagined actions. And these acting dramas, he says, are also performing actions because performing actions, they need to be considered. How will they impact the audiences? Now, Aristotle operated within a matrix. What we mean by this is that the spatio-temporal conditions and certain specific ideologies within which a poet or a writer works, they make a matrix. Now, Aristotle was a biologist and he applied scientific knowledge to literature, politics, religion, and logic. But the Greeks maintained that poet was a Vates, an inspired prophet. This means that there is always a strong connection between literature and divinity, and that poets are divinely inspired. But Aristotle, he questioned this ideological matrix, and he did not agree with this matrix of validating poetry as prophetic. Now, we say that Aristotle moved from Vates to techne because Socrates, if we say that inspiration is the root of poetry and it is related to ecstasy, and when we talk of ecstasy in the context of Socratic philosophy, we say that ecstasy means standing outside and being apart from oneself. So for Socrates, actually, poetry was a result of conscious human activity. And Aristotle was his son's disciple. He tried to establish poetry not as a product of inspiration, but as a techne. Techne is art. He was very rational in his approach, and therefore, he proposed a paradigmatic shift from Vates to techne. And that is why we read this as a phrase that from Vates to techne. Aristotle was one philosopher who took this theory of divine inspiration to art, that is techne. And this shift actually was made because he was well read, he was learned, and he approached texts with a critical objectivity. And therefore, when we are asked a question, why is Aristotle called the father of literary theory? Why we say that Aristotle was the first philosopher to give us a systematic study of text or critical theory is because from divine inspiration, he moved to technique, that is art. And therefore, this critical objectivity was a reason why he is called as the father of literary theory. In our next session, we will take up poetics as a text and talk about the important chapters and features of poetics. Thank you.